Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to the thing that everyone has been requesting for a very long time, gun tier list. Now I'm actually going to be making two of these, one for a party and one for solo, because guns that are good in the party are not necessarily good in solo, and vice versa. I'll be ranking these guns from S to F tier. S is the best, F is the worst. S tier guns are few and far between, but they are the amazing, overpowered guns. These are the ones that if you are able to have them, you should have them and should be using them very often. A-tier guns are the very, very good guns. They excel in a lot of different situations, and you'll never be sad if you craft one. You'll get a lot of use out of any of these, at least if you play in a party. B-tier guns are a bit more situational. They're like the niche use guns. There are going to be situations where these are very good, but the situations aren't as common as the ones above, and I wouldn't prioritize crafting them if you're playing in a party. C-tier guns are like the very, very niche use or almost no use at all guns. These are probably not what you should be crafting if you're playing in a party, at least most of the time. But if you really like the weapon, go ahead and use it. I mean, you're not going to be harming your party by using these guns, you'll just not be as effective as someone using one of the guns in these higher tiers. F tier, on the other hand, if you're using any of these guns, please leave the party. These are actively terrible for your team. They will screw your teammates over. I'd rather have no teammate than a teammate using any of the guns in this tier. Please don't craft them unless you're playing solo. We good? We good. Okay. Now we're going to jump into the weapons one family at a time, starting with the Magnus line. I'll be timestamping each of the weapon families in the description. If you're interested in just a particular family, go ahead and click on that one. If not, feel free to watch through the whole video and we'll explain why these weapons are where they are. So let's just jump into it with the Slug, the Grave, and the Callahan, basically the Magnus line of weapons. Their normal attacks fire off a regular bullet, does a decent amount of damage. If it does enough, it can stagger an enemy, but this isn't always going to be the case. You pretty much need elemental effectiveness for it to stagger, at least against most families. The charge attack is a lot more interesting. It fires this piercing bullet, hits multiple times, and inflicts stun. Now it does knock things back, but most of the time where you're using this, you're going to be trying to kill the enemy, or it will be an enemy that can't be knocked back. So usually knockback is quite a detriment in a party. This gun is one of the very few exceptions. And against these normal enemies, it'll just blow them up. Boom. The Slug is more useful than the Callahan, for sure. They're both niche use, however, the Slug is going to be brought more because of normal damage. Callahan being piercing damage, not so great against constructs, not so great against slimes. Now, why is this important? There's pretty much two main situations where you would bring one. There's the deconstruction zones, and there's the treasure vaults. Now the decon zones have mechs, they have gremlins, treasure vaults have slimes and gremlins. Obviously having a piercing weapon is worse than having a normal weapon in this case, because it's not effective against either, but the normal damage at least isn't ineffective against the slimes. So we're going to put the Callahan into C tier, Iron Slug into B tier. They're both niche use, but you'll understand why the Slug is so low very shortly if you don't already. And that is the Winter's Grave. Awesome weapon. Does the same thing as those do, except it's freeze instead of stun, which is about on par for where you would use this. Now the Grave has some main advantages over the Slug in particular. First off, in a party of 3 or less, you're going to be staggering gremlins with every single shot, assuming you have damage max. That is huge. Now by stagger, I mean it actually knocks the gremlins over on the ground, they can't attack, and you can just keep shooting them until they die, they will not move. That's really strong. Also strong against the slimes that you're going to be facing in the vault, and obviously does more damage to the gremlins. It's just going to be better in the situations where you want a Magnus line weapon. So the Winter's Grave is going straight up to A tier. Now these are still situational, right? You're not always playing in a decon zone or a vault, but when you do, bring this thing along and you'll be glad you did. Alright, next up we have the Blasters. The Blasters are boring but effective, at least for the most part. The normal shot on the Blasters fires 2 shots. I've even switched to the tier 3 training hall to just show you how shot these shots are. Wow. 3-shot clip, you're going to be shooting twice, switching, and then shooting again. Pretty typical. They're a kiting gun, they have good range, better range than Alchemers and Mixmasters. Good mobility, tied with Alchemers and Mixmasters, and good DPS. Now, it's a contention with the Alchemers. Sometimes your Alchemers will be doing more if you get bounces, It's not at all competing with the Mixmaster. So the Arcana, you're never going to use this over the Mixmaster or the Orbit Gun. That's fine. Still a very good weapon. You will consider using it over the Alchemers. Maybe you need the extra range. Maybe you don't care about the status effects, and maybe bounces just aren't going to happen. Then you'll use the Arcana. Solid weapon, you won't regret crafting it, unless you have a Mixmaster or Orbit Gun, but then you don't need the advice to craft this. A tier. Now I'm going to be arranging the guns within the tiers as well. I think the Winter's Grave is more important to have than the Arcana, just because there's other options for the elemental damage. The Grave is high A tier, Arcana's probably mid to low A tier, but it's still very good. Next, the Phantamos. This does not compete with status blasters, but it does still compete with the Umbra Driver. Again, good kiting weapon, good DPS, good range, good everything, good weapon. This is more important to have than the Arcana. It competes with less stuff. The downside, of course, is you probably won't be bringing this in Vanna unless you have a 4-weapon loadout and you just want to kill slimes faster, but even then the Umbra Driver will be better. However, as far as shadow damage goes, it's one of the few good options for guns. So it's going higher than the Arcana in A tier. Great weapon, good to craft. Next, the Rift Locker and the Valiants. We'll start with the Rift Locker. This is the best of the blasters. I know this is a strange thing to say, considering the blasters are all identical. They all shoot the shots, they have the range, they do the damage, their charge is garbage. However, for the Rift Locker, there are very few good piercing guns. And even more so, there are no other good piercing kiting guns, at least no other amazing piercing kiting guns. This is better than the Gilded Griffin in every way as long as you know how to weapon switch. So this is going all the way up to high A tier. This is almost S tier. I'm so tempted to put this in S because of how bad piercing guns are for the most part. I don't think I will, just because there aren't a ton of situations where you would need exactly piercing guns. I think against beasts, you're actually usually wanting to use a sword if you can instead. But if you are using exclusively guns, you'll bring this against beasts over the Blitz Needle like 90% of the time. It's just good. Valiants. It's bad. It sucks. I'm sorry. You could have 3 blasters that cover all situations, or with the power of normal damage, you could have 1 blaster that covers none. It's never super effective. If you have the ability to craft the other 3 blasters, just do that instead, because then you can have effective damage and be doing more damage. Wow. What a concept. Now the Valiance is still not a completely terrible weapon on its own. In fact, if the other blasters didn't exist, it would be decent. But the other blasters do exist, and it's not like they're hard to get, you can just craft them. So this is going straight into C tier. Is it worse than the Callahan? Yeah, it is. The Callahan, at least, you might find some niche use for it. The Valiance, if you have the other blasters, is just not good enough. It doesn't make the cut. Now moving on to the Antigua line. Oh boy. I think the Antigua line is a darn shame, because the weapons themselves look really neat. They're fun to use in concept, and if they were a bit faster, then they'd be great. They have a 6-shot clip, which means you're going to be shooting 5 times and then switching, or you can just shoot 6 times. Incredible. They make them really newbie friendly, so if you're new to the game and you have an Antigua, you probably like it. You can just shoot without having to worry about switching and get consistent DPS compared to blasters. If you do know how to switch, your blasters are going to be doing more damage always. So that's kind of a problem. The charge attacks also look cool. They have a really long range. Look at that range. Wow. I'm pretty sure that's actually the longest gun range in the game, is the last shot of this. It's just massive range. As far as the actual effectiveness, not too great. It shoots 5 shots first, and then it shoots this piercing bird thing. The piercing thing is neat, but having to shoot 5 shots first makes this lock you in for a very long time. Not the best. Damage output, it's okay. Worse than blasters if you can switch as mentioned. So for the Argent in particular, since this offers nothing special, we're going to be putting this in C tier. I think I'll put it above the Valiants though. So you can use this, and if you don't know how to weapon switch, and you happen to have one of these, go ahead and use it. It's not bad. As soon as you've learned how to weapon switch, take off the training wheels, put on these blasters, you'll do more damage. Gilded Griffin. Same thing applies. Now, the Gilded Griffin is an interesting case, because again, piercing kiting guns that are good are very rare. But the fact that the Rift Locker exists means that the Gilded Griffin is just not up to par. It's just a worse Rift Locker. We're also going to be putting this in C tier. Now again, if you don't know how to switch, feel free to use it, it's fine. But if you do, use the Rift Locker instead, please, I beg you. You can already guess what I'm going to say for the Phantamos, right? It's the same. I don't even have to talk about this one, it's just C tier. Now I'm actually putting this above the Argent, below the Griffin. I think I should put the Griffin above the Callan, actually. It's probably better than that. But the Sentenza is You know, there's not as many shadow options as there are elemental options, so it gets a slight advantage over the Argent. Still not worth crafting. Finally, the Carbine. This is probably the most interesting of the lot. It's a weaker weapon, but it has the chance to inflict poison. Wow. In solo, is that good enough? Not even close. Look at the damage increase you get from the poison. It's just not great. You get a little bit of extra damage, not enough to matter. In a party, though, you're suddenly buffing your teammates a little bit, and that's not too bad. I think there are cases where it's okay to bring the Obsidian Carbine in a party run. And in fact, there are cases where I even bring the Obsidian Carbine in a party run over another shadow weapon, just because, yeah, the poison can help. They're rare cases, but they do exist, so B tier. Worth crafting? Yeah, if you have nothing better to do, or if you just really like how cool the weapon is, go ahead. It's not the worst. Alright, Catalyzers. These used to be good weapons. Before the gunner update, the normal shots did damage, charge shots placed charges, and then the normal shots would detonate those charges. Now it's swapped. So if I shoot a normal shot at an enemy, it puts a charge. When you use the charge attack, it detonates the charges. Cool. Can you spot the very obvious downside about this weapon? Yes, it's that the only way you do damage is by using a charge attack. Now, if you've seen, I've actually recorded a run where I did an Ice Queen Shadow Layer using only Catalyzers, and it was horrible. It is probably the toughest thing I could have done. It was harder than Protogun only Vanaduke. Like, it didn't take as long, but it was harder. The reason being, when you charge attack, you have to stand still, you're very vulnerable for a while, you have to find that opportunity. Now you could argue that you could use other weapons along the way, but the problem is, to get the most out of this, you have to be stacking shots first. You stack the shots, it'll buff the AoE damage to all the crowd of enemies, then you blow it up. Cool. So you have to be locked into using this weapon for a little while if you want to get the most out of it, and that means you have to find an opportunity to use a charge attack. These are slightly less bad in a party than they are solo, because your teammates can give you that opportunity. Maybe they'll take aggro, you can start stacking up an enemy, and then when you know it will kill the enemy, you charge attack. If you don't know you'll kill them, don't use the charge, because you can just knock enemies everywhere. But if you know it's enough damage to kill, charge attack, you'll blow up a mob, you'll maybe blow up a group of mobs, great. It's still just not good. It's not worth the time that it takes to prep up all these shots just to explode it when you could have been doing consistent damage and killed the enemies. Not great. Biohazard has the advantage of inflicting poison. Neutralizer doesn't. Really all there is to it there. They're both bad. In a party they are slightly less bad, but they're C tier. They won't destroy your party as long as you're using them properly. They just won't really help a lot in 99% of situations. So that's that. Mixmaster and Orbit Gun. Which tier do you think these guns will go to? If you've seen the weapons at all, you might have a feeling they'd go in the S tier. Congratulations, you'd be correct. Best gun in the game is the Mixmaster, second best is the Orbit Gun. Here's why. This is a ghost. The ghost is spooky. It is also weak to elemental damage. The ghost is now dead. Mixmaster fires off shots. 2 shots every time you pull the trigger, each does identical damage to a storm driver, has fairly low range, but it ricochets back to you, which is kind of neat because you can hit enemies that you wouldn't otherwise. The charge shot is okay in PvE and great in PvP, fires out bigger shots. They have a high shock chance, as you might have noticed there. They can also occasionally shoot enemies through walls or shoot blocks through walls. You have to get a bit lucky. It's not a guaranteed thing. But when it happens, you can cheese open some areas. We hit those once out of 3 tries, that's about on par. But sometimes you can kill something through a wall if you really want to, or open up a block if you really want to. Of course, this DPS is the reason the Mixmaster is so good. 3-shot clip means you can just keep spamming the shots, fire twice, switch, repeat. You now have an impenetrable fortress of bullets that enemies have to tear through to get to you. There is no knockback on any of these shots, which is really good in parties where knockback can mess up your teammates. No one has to play around this, other than the screen shake that constantly occurs, and the DPS is just incredible. It's like hitting a storm driver where every single shot hits 1 bounce. And also it fires a little faster. Wow. Yeah, weapons busted. You know it, I know it, the market knows it clearly because these things, if you want one, will cost you somewhere in the range of 350,000 CE. Ouch. But if you can get one, do get one. You will benefit heavily from it. The Orbit Gun is very similar, but it goes for a solid 200k energy less. Why does it go for so much less? The answer is it's the same weapon, but it does fire instead of shock. Now, fire is usually less useful than shock. You will need it more in Ice Queen, against shock enemies, obviously, and against Quicksilver Slimes. In every other situation, shock is going to be better. So yeah, the Mixmaster comes out on top by a status, but their relative DPS is very, very similar. It's good. Easy S tier, Mixmaster's the best, Orbit's second best. Next up, you know them, you should probably love them. The Needle, Autogun, whatever you want to call it line. These are craftable unlike the Mixmaster, and they are very good. The Blitz Needle you are probably aware of because it's so notorious for being such a good weapon. Normal attack, shoots a lot of projectiles, does a lot of damage. Great. You do have to stand still during this, but you can dish out some serious hurt by just shield cancelling out afterwards. It's solid. It's not amazing, but it's solid. The charge attack, on the other hand, that's a lot of damage. It fires out a wide arc of shots. Each of them does significant damage to enemies hit, and if you stand point blank at something, you will obliterate it. The added advantage is that this does not knock back enemies, so you can consistently hit all these shots if you're close. It's really, really good. Blitz Needle, obvious S tier. One-shots Trojans, does the most damage of any weapon to Vanna. It's good. The fun fact, it actually used to be considered a really bad weapon when the game first came out. There were a couple reasons. It was actually slightly buffed at one point, but you also couldn't roll for UVs. Charge time and attack speed are really important to have on this, especially charge time. Getting the weapon's charge time fast enough that you can consistently dish out these charge attacks will make a huge difference to your gameplay. The attack speed adds more than a lot of people think it does. It shaves off 1 frame of both the normal attack and the charge attack. Now this 1 frame is in this time where you would normally be vulnerable. It's pretty useful to shave off up to 6 frames by having max attack speed. So, if you can get it, great, go for it. If you can't, at least get charge time to max if possible, because it makes a big difference. Next up, we have the Volcanic Pepper Box. It's like a Blitz Needle, but it's normal damage and it does fire, and it's bad. Why is it bad? Because it has knockback. Knockback. When you charge attack these things and they go flying backwards, you're not going to hit every single shot. If you could hit every shot, this weapon would be respectable. There's no elemental Blitz Needle, so you'd have an option against constructs. Unfortunately, it's just bad. It's not a good weapon. Don't build the Pepper Box. Pepper Box goes into F tier. It is our first F tier weapon because if you use the Pepper Box in a party, and you charge attack and you don't kill something, you're going to send it flying into your team, or just somewhere else out of their attacks. It's going to mess up the teamwork. You're not going to dish out as much damage as you'd hope, because it's knocking them out of your own charge attack. It's just not a good weapon. Please don't build a Pepper Box. Okay, moving on to something a little stronger. The Grim Repeater. The Grim Repeater is a Shadow Blitz Needle. It is really just that. It's identical to the Blitz, but it's shadow damage instead of piercing. As you might expect, this means it's still very good. It doesn't have the upside of killing Trojans or Vanaduke, But it does have the upside of being awesome, where you can kill slimes, you can kill gremlins. You basically just covered 2 more monster families that the Blitz Needle previously couldn't. Excellent weapon. It is not S tier, for the sole reason of shadow damage is not as needed as piercing damage for guns. And especially in this lineup of gun, but it's very good. I think I'm going to put it right below the Rift Locker as well. High A tier. It's excellent. It's arguably more important to have than the Winter Grave. It's just a good weapon. Finally, we have the Plague Needle. This thing I have mixed feelings about. It doesn't do as much damage as the Blitz Needle by any shot. And it also doesn't poison all that often, but it can poison. So let's see this charge attack. Poisoned at the very end. You might understand why this is a bit of a problem, where if it doesn't always poison at the start, not all of your shots are going to be buffed by the poison. If it happens to, great. But if and when it doesn't, which is going to be a lot of the time, you're not doing yourself any favors by using it over the Blitz Needle. You are, however, potentially doing your team a favor. The poison damage can make a difference in a 4-person party. If you have 4 people and you have 3 using the Blitz Needle, then yes, the Plague Needle is actually good. It will buff the rest of your party enough to be impactful. It's fine. Plague Needle goes into the B tier. It has niche use. You have to be in a party, it has to be 4 people, and people already need to be bringing a Blitz Needle. But if those conditions are met, and you bring a Plague Needle, you're slightly speeding up your team's clear. Now some of you will know what this next gun is, others will have no idea at all. This is another promo box weapon that was added partway through, called the Owlite Wand. It was exclusive to one promo, and it sucks. Really badly. The normal attack is an Alchemist shot. The weapon just never needs to reload. The only downside is you cannot weapon switch with it. Like, at all. You just can't. You're locked into the animation the whole way through. I don't know who thought this was a good idea to make a promo weapon of an Alchemer that doesn't let you switch, which is like the entire point of the weapon, but it's really bad. The DPS is low, as you might expect. It's just boring to use. It's not a good weapon. Please don't use the Owlite Wand. Charge attack is an Alchemer charge attack. Cool, whatever. So it probably goes without saying that in the solo tier list, this is one of those easy F tier weapons. It's just strictly worse than the other options out there. It's absolutely terrible. I don't know why it exists. In a party though, it doesn't actively screw your team over. So there's one good thing going for it, because it doesn't knock things back, so bottom of C tier. I can't put it lower, because it doesn't knock things around and kill your teammates. But I sure as hell am not putting it higher, because it's bad. One of the worst guns in the game. Pulsars are next. Come on, you know what's going to happen probably, right? Well, let's take a look at it and see. Pulsars, they are notorious for having massive knockback. They fire out these normal shots that then expand. The expanded shots do a lot of AoE damage, very respectable damage. Great AoE, they inflict status, they have the highest range of any gun normally does in the game. They're just awesome. Except for this one minor drawback where they fling enemies into the stratosphere. You don't want to be doing that in a party. You can stand up close and shoot the enemies, and at that point it's pretty good. But at that point you should be using this Arcana thing or one of these little drivers here. Just don't bring this in a party. The Polaris and the Wildfire, they both do elemental damage. One is shock, one is fire. You shouldn't be bringing either. Just don't, please. They're good weapons, but not in a party. Okay, next we have not the Permafrost, we have the Supernova. Supernova's interesting. It's similar to these, same concept, but it's unique in the sense where the expanded shots do more damage than a normal gun normally would. So it's not quite like super effective damage, but it's more than you normally would for neutral damage. Very interesting. Now, obviously these still have the horrible knockback drawback. You don't want to be using these in a party, so it also goes F tier. But we're going to go ahead and sneak it a little higher than those two in F tier. Still below the Pepper Box, because the Pepper Box you could normal attack and not have knockback at all. These you have to be close range to do that, and at that point just use the Blaster, use the Alchemer. Yeah, they're not good. But of the three for a party, this is the best one. And now the Permafroster. Oh my god, this is going to be so controversial. In fact, this is going to be the most heavily debated thing in this video, unless you've all played a ton of Grinchland Assault. This weapon is good in a party. If you're playing Grinchland Assault, and everyone knows what they're doing. Wow, I said it. A Pulsar is good in a party. Now, why is it good in a party before I get burned to the stake for saying that? In Grinchland Assault, you are dealing with waves of gremlins, and the Permafroster's long-range shot will knock them all back, pile them all into the convenient corners of the map. It's like the one place where knockback can be a good thing. And if you're knocking back and knocking down all of the enemies, then yes, that's also pretty good, because unlike normally, where knocking back enemies can fling attacking enemies into your teammates, this actually will interrupt the gremlin's attack animation. It's not bad. It's not like a decon zone either, where there's just no corners to knock things into. You can actually knock enemies into meaningful corners, bunch them up for your team, and have an impact. This is the best weapon in Grinchland Assault for solo players, and in a party, it's still not bad there. Now everywhere else in the game, just please don't use a Pulsar. But if you know what you're doing, and your team is comfortable with you using this, it's actually good in Grinchland Assault. I'm gonna put it in mid-B tier. Wow. Yeah, please don't burn me at the stake for that one. If you've played a ton of Grinchland Assault, and you've played with someone who knows what they're doing with a Permafroster, you probably know what I'm talking about. This thing dishes out serious damage. But it's really, really heavily niche to that one important mission. This is where things get a little tricky. Alchemers. Alchemers are very hard to use. This tier will not apply to everyone. If you don't know how to weapon switch consistently yet, don't take an Alchemer. Instead, just take a Blaster. If you do, let's look into why these are good. So these have 2 shot clips. You shoot twice, they reload, their charge attack is solid. Boom, shoots a shot, splits off into 4 little projectiles. If you shoot at a spawn point with this, you can hit up to 6 shots worth of damage on one enemy, or if you shoot at the right angle. Now, the normal shots of Alchemers will bounce at a 90-degree angle at most, but it's random within that 90 degrees. So if you shoot at the right spots, you can hit bounces into other enemies somewhat consistently. To use these weapons well, you have to be able to weapon switch, so you shoot, shield, switch. Yeah. It's mechanically intensive, but it does a lot of damage. You get some serious DPS outputs here. The range is low to compensate for the high damage, but that's okay. Nova Driver is the highest damage of the Alchemers, but has no status condition. However, that no status condition is generally fine. Nova Driver gets a high A, even above the Rift Locker. Nova Driver is a very important weapon to have if you're using elemental damage, and if you don't already have an Arcana or Mixmaster or Orbit Gun. If you already have an Arcana, you might consider getting one of these. There's a lot of situations where they're higher damage output. It's just a good weapon. Just make sure you know how to switch before you craft one of these, because it's a big investment to something that you will never use if you don't know how to switch. Next, the Magma and Storm Drivers. The Magma should probably speak for itself. Fire damage, not as useful. There's very rare situations where this will be good. In fact, I can only think of the icy slimes in Ice Queen that shoot out their spikes, and setting them on fire gets rid of that effect, so cool. Magma Driver could be good there. I still think you'd rather just take shadow damage, so yeah, it's just the worst of the Alchemers. Still a decent weapon overall, but there's better choices, so C. Next, we have the Storm Driver. Storm Driver's good. Shock is a respectable status condition, interrupts attacks. Solid. A tier. Gonna put it below the Rift Locker. I don't think it's as important, but if you're having a second Alchemer that you're gonna craft to swap with the Nova Driver, then consider going for the Storm Driver, because adding in Shock to your repertoire is gonna add a little bit extra damage and add a little bit of extra safety for your team. Just a good weapon. Finally, Umbra and Hail. Oh boy. Hail is interesting. Now, freeze on demand with the charge attack, or at least very close to on demand, it has a high freeze chance, even if not guaranteed, is a powerful effect. Sometimes freezing an enemy will open up an opportunity for a party member to destroy it, or for you to follow up with another charge attack and blow it up. You can chain freeze off of one enemy with charge attack. Freeze it, charge again, it'll freeze again, if you get lucky. Or not even lucky, if you don't get unlucky. The downside is that for normal switching, freeze is usually a bit worse. When an enemy is frozen, you can't shield bump it away. That's a downside. Usually you don't care if the enemy is frozen in place or not. You're just kiting anyways. I'm going to put this in B tier. If you have the Nova and the Storm already, it's a decent craft, right? Sometimes you'll find a stage where you think, wow, I wish I could lock down this enemy. And you can. But the situation is just not nearly as common as where you would use these two. Last and certainly not least, we have the Umbra Driver. It's just shadow damage. Nothing else, nothing special, no status. Great. Solid weapon. Higher DPS than Phantamos in many situations. There are still situations where you'd use the Phantamos over this, largely because of the extended range, but the Umbra is an excellent craft, if you know how to weapon switch. So I'm putting it as well above the Riftlocker. Oh, would you look at that? These Tortofists seem to have teleported into the bottom of F tier. I wonder what happened there. You want to see why this weapon is hot garbage? Wow, there it is. You know what I like more than kiting on a weapon, which lets me stay safe while dealing out consistent damage to enemies, is when the weapon pulls you into the enemy like a sword would, but does the damage that a gun would, relies on gun UVs, and is generally terrible. You have to hit a melee hit to do most of the damage. Part of the damage comes from a ranged hit, but you have to hit the melee for most of it. Why would you not just use the Windmillion? It's sword, sure, but like, it does more damage than this thing ever could. It has a better swing pattern. It doesn't send you flying into everything uncontrollably without being able to push yourself out of it. You can shield cancel the Windmillion faster. This thing has to have a great charge attack to compensate, right? Well, kind of. It looks cool, and it can do decent damage if you get lucky. Problem is, you have to get very lucky. Oh, look at this one. The crystals didn't land on the enemy. Oh, too bad. These crystals, if an enemy walks into them afterwards, can deal damage. But you might notice, they start invincitinking, because the crystals make the enemies immune to them for a little while after being hit by them 3 times. Wow. Incredible design. So yeah, even in the dream scenario where you happen to get an enemy trapped between all of these crystals, and it happens to be bouncing around them like a pinball, being hit over and over, it'll become invincible to the crystals after 3 hits anyways, so who cares? And that situation, it never happens. Like, never. Look at this enemy, wow. Okay, well, will it walk into the crystals? Sometimes. You might have noticed those ones tried to walk around the bottom though, and you know why? Because the crystals are coded as walls. Yeah, that's right, enemies will actively try to avoid walking into the crystals, which makes this thing even worse. And not only that, but it flings stuff all over the place. Like, if it happens to not kill these, which would be a miracle, wow, it actually didn't, it would have sent them flying backwards. Now, I got unlucky with the crystal spread, so it didn't even really hit it at all. But if it did hit it, it would have sent it flying around. My party would have been like, what the heck is going on here? It wouldn't have done nearly enough damage to justify any of this. It's just bad. Don't craft Tortofists, do yourself a favor, and no, they're not good in solo either. Just don't make them. Great. Now the reason I've got them ranked as follows is because normal damage is the worst of these, Elemental's second worst because there's so many good elemental options, Shadow's the third worst because there's so many good shadow options, and then Piercing, well, there's not many good piercing options. But it still manages to be terrible, so just don't. There you go. I hope this tier list has been useful for some of you. It's been a long time in the making. I actually fully made a video before that took a lot more effort than this one, but couldn't be uploaded because of rendering issues. Still, I think this one turned out pretty well in the end, so yeah, I'm hopeful that it's been useful. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.